Welcome, everyone. Welcome to the YIVO Institute for Jewish Research. My name is Alex Weiser. I'm the Public Programs Director of YIVO. And we're so pleased to have you here with us for our annual Jewish Christmas celebration. This is a series that we've started 5 or 6 years ago, exploring the so-called December dilemma. The fact that at this time of year, Christmas looms so large, even for those of us that don't celebrate. But this gives us, a wonderful opportunity actually to reflect on different topics in Jewish culture related to Christmas and related to Jesus. In the past, we've had a sing-along of Christmas songs written by Jewish composers. We've had events on Jewish folklore and Ashkenazi Jewish traditions that related to Christmas. We've had events on Jews and Chinese food. And more, and it's always really interesting. And today will be no exception, I'm sure, a discussion of Jesus in modern Jewish literature. And we're really pleased to have Professor Neta Stahl here with us for this lecture. Neta Stahl is Professor of Modern Hebrew Literature and head of the Hebrew and Yiddish subdivision at Johns Hopkins University. She's the author of The Divine in Modern Hebrew Literature and is currently working on a book about the poet Uri Zvi Greenberg. Welcome, Neta.
Hi, good evening. You hear me well?
Yes.
Good. So thank you, Alex, and thank you all for coming. The lecture today is actually, it's something that it's based on the first book that I wrote about Jesus in modern Hebrew literature. It's called Other and Brother. And the kind of like the title of this talk, Jewish Jesus or Jewish Christmas, goes along or kind of fits that dichotomy, I would say, or sort of like something we were just chatting. It sounds so strange combination of Jesus, Jewish Jesus or Jewish Christmas. I will try to do some kind of like almost kind of like overview, because it's really, usually I teach a semester on this topic, and we can't really go through all the different kind of Jewish Jesuses that are there, but I will actually start maybe from a Jewish, I will start from America in 1939, when in an address to the Chicago Ethical Society in November 1939, the leader of the society, Dr. Horace J. Bridges, shared with his audience the following episode, which occurred about a decade earlier. When speaking in a synagogue in Detroit, I noticed the names of a number of famous Jews of ancient and modern times painted, if I remember rightly, on the inner side of the dome, which surrounded the building. The most conspicuous feature of this list to me was the absence from it of the name of Jesus. Remember, this is in a synagogue. I later discussed this matter with a learned rabbi who was my personal friend. He answered that, of course, the time would come when the name of Jesus would be given its proper place in such a list, but that public opinion among present-day Jews was not yet ripe for it. So this is 39. What is striking about Bridges' surprise is not only his expectation that Jesus will be there, but that the figure of Jesus is, in a sense, was actually part of this list all along, right? With Moses and David and all the Jewish figures, Jesus was supposed to be there. Yes, yet Jews were not yet ripe for it, as the rabbi said, right? And what I want to show today is that really that kind of like Jesus figure almost always in there, but in a way being invited in one hand and rejected in the other, which is a reference to the way the Talmud refers actually to Christianity. And we can start from there just maybe to say something about that. Obviously, for traditional Judaism, in traditional Judaism, Jesus is the ultimate other, right? The one that is, even his name is not pronounced. The word, the Yeshua is, may his name be cursed, and it's not even supposed to be pronounced, right? But even the Talmud is not clearly rejecting Jesus himself. The Talmud is ambivalent more about Christianity than about Jesus. And there are different kind of like references to what we think might be Jesus in the Talmud. We think because we are not sure, because censorship and generations of being afraid of saying something that is not supposedly allowed to be said, we are not completely sure that these are references to Jesus. But when they are not entirely negative or positive, they usually just dismiss both Jesus and Christianity as not important enough to give too much attention to. Obviously we won't deal with that so much, but we should keep it in mind that then maybe one of the most famous poets that dealt with Jesus is Uri Zvi Greenberg. In fact, Uri Zvi Greenberg wrote this, you can see in Yiddish, a poem, one of his poems about Jesus, one of the famous one, which he published in 1922 in Albatross, which is a journal that he edited. This is actually, I will just say briefly, it's not his first poem on Jesus. He started writing about Jesus right after he came back as a veteran of World War I. He came back from the battlefield, and he writes about Jesus in a very passionate way as one of the only kind of like figures that can identify with his suffering. And then maybe his entire life, his entire poetic life, Jesus is there. He's there here when Greenberg just experienced a pogrom in his hometown, and he, as I said, just came not long before, came from the battlefield. It's 1922, and is considering now if to stay in Warsaw because the authorities are after him because he writes about Christianity and Jesus in a way that seems to be too suspicious for the Polish authorities. And I'll just read a little bit of what he writes here. Why am I one of the convoy of the painted, not hanging next to you on a village pillar, as, at a crossroad, the sun drying me, the night stretching itself over me? I am your brother. Look at the bones of my body, my spinal cord. In the light of the world, at dawn, I'm transparent, shining torments. Day has gone, night comes. By day, I am mute like you. I can no longer carry the heavy bronze on my head and eyes. But at night, the voice of the deeper water pulls me down to descend in it, Over my head, walls surrounded me, a three-story building, and the dead streets of a city of churches. I'm wrapped up, brother Jesus, wrapped up, Jewish skin and bones, 2,000 years after you old. So what you can see here, and it's actually what you see many times in Greenberg's depictions of Jesus, when Jesus is still, or rather I should say, when Greenberg is still in Europe, before he immigrates to Israel, to the land of Israel, it's a Jesus that was once Jewish, now actually captured by Christianity, usually on the cross in the church. And this capture is actually made Jesus kind of forget his roots, his Jewish roots. Sometimes because actually of the adoration of the Christians, believers. And the Jewish Greenberg faces that cross and the figure on it with a plea to watch the agony of the Jews all over Europe, the pogroms. Later in the poem, he actually says, look, I would come and help you, but I have other brothers, and these other brothers are in the dry swamps in Hadera, which is an Israeli settlement, not yet Israeli, but a settlement in the land of Israel where the pioneers, the Zionist pioneers, are there. And Greenberg says, I think I will leave you. I'll choose them because they need me more than you. And not that long afterwards, he actually immigrated to the land of Israel. And what is interesting is as if he takes Jesus with him. And in one of his, in the first book of poetry of Greenberg's in Hebrew, so he switches for when he gets to Palestine to writing almost entirely in Hebrew. And the book, the famous book called Iמה גדולה וירח, A Great Horror and a Moon, and he writes this. What shall I say in the Galilee, condemned brother, as I arrive and find the shepherds of the Galilee tanned and with a dream in their eyes, if they see me clothed in European dress, and in my eyes no remnant of an eastern sunrise fire, rather glimmering splinters of the sunset, dark blood from the moment to moment, the flashing of knives, and maybe that shadow of the three ends on my body. So for Greenberg, in a sense, what becomes the shadow of the cross is being an exilic Jew. And when he arrives to Palestine, he imagines himself as leaving the cross and Jesus on him back there in Europe, and trying to tell something else to the shepherd of the Galilee. And the next part of this poem that I didn't include is actually an attempt to say to the shepherds, here I am, it's true that I am coming from Europe, but look, I'm bringing Jesus with me. Jesus is not there hanging on that tree, as the shepherds here kind of like imagines them asking him, but actually he then mostly portrays the figure of Jesus as the sorry, it's not mine. As the figure that, in a sense, becomes him. he sees himself as the Jesus of, and in that sense, and this is kind of like an interesting thing that is not maybe unique only to Greenberg, when around the same time that Greenberg writes these poems on Jesus, the painter Van Rubin, born in Romania but also moving to Palestine in 1921, he paints this painting and a few others where Jesus actually plays an important role. And what you can see here, I was told that I can use this, is here is these are the houses of the new settlers, the pioneers, the Jewish pioneers. This is the Mount Tabor or Gilboa, one of them, probably the Jezreel Valley, which plays an important role also in Greenberg's poetry and many other poets from the time. And you can see here is the old Jew, the Jew from the diaspora, the exilic Jew. And this is Jesus, kind of like imagined in a sense, in a way, in the way that the pioneers imagined themselves. And indeed, that we can see in journals and in writings by early, like second Aliyah pioneers, second and third Aliyah people, how they actually really were sort of like the New Testament was very much part of their reading list. It was there with them. And they write about Jesus as kind of like the embodiment of their own hardships, the idea that there is this sense of agony and pain that involved in their new life in this hard land. They see themselves sort of like as Jesus. For Greenberg, I should say, it's even more than that. In some of his poems, he calls Jesus to get out of the monasteries and join all these new pioneers to come and join this new mission to redeem the land of Israel. And in these poems, he actually really refers to Jesus as a necessary Messiah. In that project, the more Greenberg becomes more right-winger, kind of messianic. It's kind of a transition that happens throughout the late 20s and the beginning of the 30s. He actually sees Jesus as sort of like the Messiah that is needed in order for the Jews to redeem their land. He later writes some poems that also describe him as sort of like a Jesus in the sense of, he actually says, you, Jesus, at least had a trial, but I, the poet that was accused by many in Israel as a messianic revisionist that called for shedding blood in order to redeem the country, I'm the one. He then becomes a persona non grata among most of the Yishuv people, and he says to Jesus, you at least got the trial that gave you, so you had a stage to say that you are innocent, but I, Uri Zvi Greenberg, they condemned me and made me menudeh, kind of like someone that is put outside of the kahal, of the Yishuv. And this is, again, another way, and this is where he says to him, you're my brother, but you, and they are going to crucify me like they did you. So, but I will move to another important, really important figure in the story of writing about Jesus. And this is the famous historian, professor, one of the founders of the Hebrew University, Yosef Klausner. Yosef Klausner was, he really saw himself as a literature person, as an intellectual, not specifically historian, but yet someone that his mission was to educate the younger generation to, and in that kind of sense, he comes to this mission of writing Jesus of Nazareth, and he actually started writing it in like chapters that he published from 1907 through 1910. He publishes chapters in Hashiloach, which is the periodical that he edited, and in that sense was very influential at the time. In 1922, he moved already to Palestine. I think it's 1919 that he comes to Palestine, and he published this first Hebrew life of Jesus, sort of. There is this genre of the story of Jesus that is written since the middle of the 19th century. We have different kind of like historians, not Jews usually, sometimes do, but not in Hebrew for sure, who write the story of Jesus from as if this is a history book. This is, and someone asked me about, did he really exist? So for these people, he did exist. And Klausner wants to say, it's not only that he exists, here is who he was. Now, what is interesting about the way Klausner sees it is that for him, what is most important about Jesus, maybe, is that he was, in a sense, what we would call today a Sabra. He was born in the land of Israel. And not only that, it's the land that shaped him. This was indeed, this is from the translation of the book. This is indeed a fitting birthplace for the moralist and world reformer, and for his childish visions and youthful dreams. The majestic beauty of the place was an awe-inspiring sight, and must, even without his knowledge, have exerted an influence on Jesus. There, cut off by mountains from their great world, wrapped up in natural beauty, a beauty tender and peaceful, so wonderful in its sorrowful in its peacefulness, and within a nation of land workers who ask for nothing. Jesus had to become a dreamer and a visionary whose thoughts turned to his people's future, to the heavy Roman yoke, and, most of all, to the sorrows of the individual soul, and to the kingdom of heaven, a kingdom not of this world. The mountains of Judea, overwhelming in their magnificence and bare, you get the point, right? For what Klausner tries to portray is a figure that really is shaped by the beautiful, magnificent mountain of the Galilee, and it becomes a sort of like an epitome for a leader of, he would add, a man of great morality, an artist of fables. So not just any leader, but a moral leader, a leader of great charisma. And what is really, really important in the way that Klausner thinks of Jesus is that he knew how to speak to the people. He was a great orator, a good politician, if you will, a leader, because he knew he was like a poet, a good poet. He, in a sense, portrays very much like the biblical prophet, someone that will stand there and everyone will listen because of his beautiful fables, sharpness and wit, his short proverbs and expressions, allow his moral teaching to be as asset of the many. And really what we see from Klausner is that he imagines a Zionist Jesus, a nationalist Zionist Jesus that can take with him the mob and lead them to this kind of a moral, better society. So and in this sense, is shaping, in a sense, almost given to a lot of Zionist Hebrew writers, the kind of figure he himself thinks, and they actually, some of them actually obey, portray. In a sense, it's a problematic relationship because the first Hebrew novel, written indeed not so long after the publication, in 1937 it was published, but written a little bit earlier, is very much influenced by Klausner's depiction of Jesus, although I'll say a few minutes about it a little later, but Klausner had some complaints about it. It wasn't exactly what he wanted. I'll explain why. But the writer is a famous writer already, a teacher, and Aaron Avram Kabak, who actually was famous for historical novels that he has written. And this, The Narrow Path, tells the story of Jesus, sort of like starting very similar to what Klausner depicted. Someone that is very much shaped by the life in the Galilee, in the kind of like likes to be around others and to preach to others. But what more kind of like what seems to interest Kabak more is a sort of like a Jesus that is not so sure about what Klausner was sure about. So this is a nationalist Jesus that is looking for redemption, but soon enough he realizes that those people that his uncle and his father who join the uprising against the Romans actually pay a too heavy price. And he becomes very much hesitant of this idea of giving your life for the sake of the nation, and he starts to think of maybe redemption is not a redemption of the nation in terms of the land, but maybe there is an inner redemption that is that we all need to look inside and find. And here is like one of the quote that Jesus says to his followers: "How long will it take before you understand?" Jesus remonstrated in a despairing voice. "What are frontiers that sometimes widen and sometimes shrink? This world of earth that is sacred to me today because it is my land, and is desecrated tomorrow because my neighbor came and took it from me for himself. What is it? Tell me, of what value are wide frontiers when he who sits within them has a jealous eye and a widened, chivalrous heart? What is the value of this freedom if the man who enjoys it has a fettered spirit, yoked and bound to the dust?" So in that sense, for Kabak, Jesus is, in our world today, we would say, too appeasing in the eyes of Kloisner, the Kabak Jesus was too appeasing. In a sense, he gave a lecture, and he said in that lecture, and then wrote it as a review, Kabak got it right in terms of the spirit of the Second Temple era, and he understood how to shape the world of the Jews at the time, but he missed in his figure of Jesus because he made Jesus too Christian in the sense that this Jesus is not a national Jesus, and it's a Jesus that looks for redemption from within, while we, the Jews, know, or at least should understand that Jesus, because he was Jewish, was not that kind of Christian or of Jew. He was a real Jew and therefore a nationalist Jew. So the argument became an argument about the identity of the Jew, and not so much because of who was Jesus, but who is actually a good, real national Jew. Now, Kabak was actually bothered exactly by that in a lecture that he gave here in the upper section. He argued, this is a lecture that he gave actually in the Gymnasia Rechavia, where he was a teacher, and he said that miserable man from Nazareth, whom people made into a miracle maker, kind of God, was created by these people because of their thirst for a myth and their desire to hold on to some anchor so they would not be washed away by the vacuum of the depths of their empty lives. So in a sense, Kabak says, well, even that Jesus that we all want to imagine, it's just because we are weak. Actually, he wasn't really what we imagine him to be, but I wanted to write about the creation of that myth, that thirst for someone that is bigger than life. And but I think is interesting, and here I come to maybe a more familiar novel for the Yiddishist among you, Shalom Asch's The Nazarene. Interestingly published, written in Yiddish, but actually published in English first in 1939, so just shortly after Kabak's book. We won't have time to talk too much about it, but I want to say something about the fact that it was written in Yiddish, but only published in Yiddish in 1943. So it took a long time until anyone, and it was already in the state, would agree to publish Asch's book on Jesus in Yiddish. He did find a publisher that agreed to do that in English and in Hebrew. And what I want to say about it, I can't get into the details. It's very heavy. It's a really thick novel. But in it, Asch tries to tell the story of Jesus from the point of view of basically 4 different characters that are actually embedded in 2. The story starts with a meeting, a conversation that lasts for a long time, actually between a Polish scholar and a Jewish man that he hires because he wants to tell him a secret and he wants him to write it. He calls him Josephus, and he tells him that his story is actually the fact that he is a reincarnation of a Roman soldier from the time of Jesus, and he participated in the execution of Jesus, in the crucifixion. It turns out that the Jew that writes his story then says he is also a reincarnation of a Jewish man from the time of Jesus, and both men tells the story of Jesus from that time. Both became also followers of Jesus. So I kind of like gave you a very quick and flattering overview of a very long novel, but you can see why some Jewish responses were not very enthusiastic about this kind of portrayal of Jesus, especially Ash was blamed of being appeasing or trying to write a book that is for the goyim, is for the non-Jewish readers, sort of like trying to say, look, we all are part of the same, we Jews and Christians, we can all gather around Jesus. This kind of like man that we can tell his story as if it is a shared story, and in this sense, don't believe those who say that we Jews crucified Jesus or are to blame for Jesus' crucifixion, because here we, like you, admired Jesus and followed him, and would have been, we would be still the same religion if only history wouldn't take us apart. So that kind of like blame was, in a sense, you can see Chaim Zalakovsky was very much for Ash, so much so that he translated his Yiddish to Hebrew, to English novel. He says the novel, he thought it was so good because of its potential to cause many Christian readers to revise any anti-Semitic views that they may have held. So, in a sense, this is, I don't know, some people would say that kind of motivation may have caused many of his Jewish readers to say, this is not our Jesus, or we don't want to take part of this kind of presentation of Jesus as just to appease or to make those anti-Semites think better on us. In an article, Friedlander, a researcher, a speaker of many Jews in America that kind of like were upset about it, compared the Jesus of Ash to the Jesus of Kabak. And he said, there are two Jesuses here. We have here an issue with a Hebrew Jesus and an exilic one. One was created under the apologetic shadow, a creature of the exilic psyche, and the other is a creation of the Jewish renewal and part of its natural process. So you can see how here too ideology kind of dictates the reception of Ash's book. Of course, I have to say, maybe not, of course, it's not a given that Kabak's novel, the Hebrew novel, became so much liked and popular in the Yishuv, in the Jewish community in Palestine at the time, and later in the state of Israel, that it was included in the reading list high schools for many years. Until the 70s, it was still on this reading list. So when I give this lecture in front of a certain age of audience, they sometimes actually remember reading it for their high school exams. So I'm kind of like, I see that we don't have much time, so I'll speed up a little bit, and I'll go to some other kind of like taste of more kind of, I would say, maybe almost the opposite of that thinking of Jesus, like Greenberg started, like the Greenberg early poems, sorry. Think of Jesus as part of Europe, and in a way, part of Europe as a negative or threatening elements of Europe. Leah Goldberg, and she actually, she, like Greenberg, came from Poland to the land of, to Palestine a little bit later, actually, but she, in her poetry, Jesus is actually, and Christianity in general, actually represents her longing for Europe and for the life that she had in a sense, not only a kind of like personal life, but also intellectual and aesthetic life. And she opens a sort of like, I call it a new period or a new story of Jesus, especially by writers that were born and raised in Israel already, and like Goldberg. And for these writers, more contemporary writers, Jesus really is associated with the appealing West. They usually write about Jesus in relation to traveling in Europe, especially going to museums and standing in front of famous paintings. And they identify with the kind of Jesus, in a sense, a little bit like here, of that image of a foreign God. So the foreignness of Jesus is actually appealing and seems less kind of like outside of the parochial kind of like Jewish or Judaism of their life in Israel among other Jews, seeming in a sense as a poison and as because of its temptation. I'll skip 1 second for to Yona Volach, another woman poet, very famous for a very sexual and kind of like, in a sense, bold poetry. In Israel, she paved the way for a very unabashed poetry about topics that other people will not write. She died in 86 from cancer, so she died died very young. But this is one of her poems. She writes about actually she's a stroll in a church in Jerusalem, and she says she's with a lover, and she says in church it's permitted and in synagogue forbidden, and this is about kissing in the church. I will say something about illusions, pro and con, and you will button up everything. My sweet Jesus will go on being human and forgiving despite everything, so I don't miss anything. We will walk around cool, shady shady corridors, inside illusions of perspectives that architecture creates. Who relates to illusions in architecture, where everything's real, matter, etc.? A spirit will hover over the water. We will stroll around this body of Jesus. We will walk inside the silent waterways of his life, inside illusions that architectural perspective creates. We will light candles of happiness in memory or honor of something beautiful. We will make love wherever you think one should. So what Wallach does here is that she kind of creates that space, or reimagine the space of the church as the body of Christ, of Jesus. And in it, Jesus is, in a sense, a better lover, a lover that would permit what her lover doesn't allow, which is to kiss in the church. And what I want to say about it is that she tries to tell us, I think, something about, she says that in other poems as well. For her, Jesus represents that forbidden space that she wants to go to, against the prohibitions, against the what Goldberg said, prohibited voice of our nation or forefathers. And that body of Jesus is also that world, aesthetic world of the West, of the non-Jewish world that kind of encloses Jewish writers, artists, in their mind, in those in the building of the synagogue. That in synagogue it's forbidden, right? But in church, it's allowed. I don't know if you have questions, or if maybe I'll just read one more line from a beautiful part of one of, I think, the most beautiful novels written about Jesus in Hebrew, but translated to English. It's called Christ of Fish. And I won't say much about it because I really wanted to leave time for questions. But in there, Jesus is a metaphor. It's a metaphor for everything that might resemble a hope, or sort of like mercy on the people that are the protagonists of this novel. The novel tells the story of immigrants from Central Europe in Tel Aviv in the early days of Israeli statehood. They don't speak the language. They speak among themselves mostly in Yiddish or in German, or sometimes in Romanian. There are a lot of languages mixed in this novel. They are older people. They are uprooted from their home, again, in Europe. But here is, I'll read. In the spring, the sea blossomed. Scents rose from the water. The blue doors of gambling dens stood in the air. Christ was. For in Café Pilz in the afternoon, I remember, Mr. Moskowitz took a pinch of snuff from a golden snuff box, and Aunt Magda trod the earth's crust as though she were a bird. Jesus was. That's enough. And the magic happened. And Aunt Magda is sort of like dancing like a bird. And the world, for a very short moment, is kind of lightened by the presence of Christ there. So, thank you.
Excuse me, does anyone have any questions? I'll ask one question. So it's really interesting to me how Jesus really, in all these examples, refracts different ideologies of the writers, both, seeing the land of Israel as a source of renewal for Jewish life, but also seeing Jesus as representing Europe. On the other hand, seeing Jesus as a kind of Jewish national figure, a prototypical Jewish national figure maybe. On the other hand, seeing Jesus as representing, the other and outside of the Jewish world. Why do you think that Jesus came to represent those things for, so many disparate things?
Well, it's a great question. I think so it's, in a way, he embodies that kind of like all these kind of like symbolic and let's say aspirations, I would say, this symbolic imagination of what the Jewish identity or the Jewish self is, right? This is in one hand. On the other hand, is also part of the Christian world, right? And in that, my argument is that for people who experience, in a sense, Christian persecution or were really raised in Europe, pre-World War II, for them, and for sure after World War, after the Holocaust, for them Jesus is part of Christianity. But even then, we actually see reclamation of Jesus. Even after the Holocaust, that is, we can see by writers may present Jesus as the Jewish victim, as did we go back to to the Chagall there. So this is Chagall, and it's after a pogrom, right? He writes like Greenberg in a sense. He thinks of Jesus as the Jewish suffering man on the cross, and I think that's the kind of like the with Jesus that we don't know even if he existed, right? Who was he? And the scriptures say to us something, and to that, one of the Hebrew poets that I like to quote, an Israeli poet, he wrote a poetry book with all the poems are about Jesus. And he starts with the first poem is that I read the New Testament, and these are empty pages. You call them leaves because of the kind of like the way the scriptures are made of, not really paper at the time, but just that. So these leaves are empty, and I am there to just fill it with whatever I feel is right, because we don't really know, and we have to. This is so, yeah.
I have another question before I'll walk up there.
Someone there would, yes.
This quote that you just said really raises another question that I was on my mind of, where the inspiration for thinking about Jesus is coming from, like which sources. Because you mentioned at the beginning of the talk that Jesus shows up in the Talmud. We've also had talks in past years of this series about Toldos Yeshu.
Right.
And so Jewish, writings from antiquity about Jesus. But then on the other hand, a lot of what you're describing today sounds just like what this quote is articulating, the idea of kind of reading the New Testament with just fresh eyes and putting one's own ideology on it. Do Jewish sources play a role for, older Jewish sources play a role for these writers, or is it mostly the New Testament?
It's mostly the New Testament. And yeah, it has to do with the rejection of many of the modern Jews more or less rejected the Talmud and the canon and didn't. Some of them really were maybe familiar with Toldot Yeshu sometimes, but most of them actually it's the New Testament, or even just the figure of Jesus as just because not all of them are even very well-versed in the New Testament, but actually, like all of us, know that there is this figure that is there, and they are fascinated by. Yeah.
I come to it from a totally different angle, because I'm a convert from Southern Baptism. And in Southern Baptist, what the Southern Baptists call the Old Testament is very important. I knew when I met my husband, who's now my husband, who's Jewish, we would talk, we knew all the stories from the Old Testament because Southern Baptists read them too. And as a child, I identified with what we called the Hebrew children. The Hebrew children did this, and the Hebrew children did that, and the Hebrew children, and then all of a sudden, the Hebrew children reject Jesus. So the Hebrew children are not good anymore. And I had totally identified with the Hebrew children, all the stories and the going out of Israel and all that. I thought I was a Hebrew child. And then all of a sudden, the Hebrew children are all bad because they rejected Jesus. And we tithed every week. And at Christmas time, we had a box of envelopes, white envelopes, and the envelope at Christmas was red because it was a extra missionary offering to send missionaries to the two big sin spots in the world, Africa and New York City. And so that first poem that you read, Uri Zvi Greenberg, I think it was, where he was saying, I have the same spine and I'm wrapped up in the same skin. That just means so much to me, because it seems that there's some big switch that I didn't make when I was a kid. And I remember going to a class when I was 8 or 9. This was in Fairbanks, Alaska. And before I was a Southern Baptist, and a friend had asked me to go to class with her on Sunday. And I went, and it was great because you got points for memorizing Bible verses, and you could buy things in the store with the points. Like I got a big pencil with a Jesus on the end, and I was really saving up to get the burning bush nightlight, which I never quite got enough for. But we were reading in the class, and I was a kid. This is in the early 50s. I must be like 54, 55. I was born in 47. And we read a Bible passage that we would discuss. And I could read. I wasn't a great reader, but I knew I could read. And she said, well, we know from this passage that we can't watch a Marilyn Monroe movie. And I read the passage, and I thought, I know I can read, and I don't see anything about Marilyn Monroe in here. So I raised my hand, and I said, I don't see it. And she said, well, because we're reading a translation, and the original, in Hebrew, it says it. And I said, then why don't we read it in the original? And she said, it's a lost language. Now, she was a young woman, obviously not educated, because it's obviously not a lost language. But when I was a little kid, I thought, I'm going to go out and find Hebrew somehow and dig it up so we could know what's the truth. But anyway, Jesus, I remember when I came to New York, I was 27 years old. This is how backward I was in religion. And I was going out with a Jewish guy, and we had a fight, and he told me, Jesus was Jewish. And I started crying, and I said, "You're just saying that to upset me." And he said, no, he was. I said, he wasn't. So it's very interesting to see how Jews look at Jesus, because it's very strange for Christians too.
Thank you. Thank you for that comment. 2 questions from online, and then we can finish up with a question at the front. I'll just ask both of them together. So some viewers were asking, these writers were so sympathetic to Jesus, they asked, were there any writers who actually converted to Christianity? On the other hand, we saw, Jesus positively reflected in all of these writings. Were there other contemporaneous, modern Jewish literary Jesuses that had negative things to say?
None of them that I know converted to Christianity. There is, I didn't mention here, someone, there was someone that wrote Pinchas Sadeh, I don't know if anyone heard, he wrote a novel that's a kind of like a very testimonial, kind of semi-autobiographical novel where Jesus plays an important role in one of its chapters. And people, and it's such a passionate way of thinking of Jesus. He actually presented, the novel was published in 1957, but became sort of like a cult novel for the younger Israelis at the time. And part of it was because it was unashamed by its kind of adoration to Christianity. And some people blamed Sadeh for, what's the difference between you and a Christian? But I don't think that he converted. But it was part of again, as you mentioned before, again, kind of like projecting on Jesus, in a sense, those kind of like whatever one wanted. So not necessarily because they wanted to become Christians, but in a sense, it wasn't even, I think, in that sense, something that was important for them if they are Jewish or Christian. Sometimes it's even to say, it doesn't matter. I'm a Jew, I'm a Christian, it doesn't matter. Jesus is above this. For me, it just represents some kind of an ideal humanist or something like that. So it's not really, it's kind of like in many of these depictions, it's to take Jesus away from the kind of like theological and a religious setup and kind of like place him above and beyond that realm. Yeah, I don't remember what was the second question.
The other question was, were there any texts for this period that looked at Jesus negatively or made fun of Jesus, or was it always a way to project positive things?
So I can say one example that I always give. It's actually a few stories by Shmuel Yosef Agnon, who was an Orthodox, very important, Nobel laureate for literature, wrote a lot of very famous novels about, Jews and Judaism. He has 2, actually maybe 3, I would say, stories where Jesus appears. In all 3 of them, he actually kind of like mocks those who adore Jesus and think of Jesus as this kind of like, as if this is where redemption would come or he actually kind of like ridicule exactly these kind of writers that really kind of attribute to Jesus more than what he is. So I won't get to the details, but these are very funny stories in a way.
One final question.
Hi, thank you for your interesting talk. I grew up in a community that was primarily Christian. I went to synagogue as a child, but I never heard anything from the Jewish perspective about Jesus, which I always thought was unfortunate because we're surrounded by Christians and Christmas and so forth, and yet as Jews, we don't learn anything about it. Like, you know, what's the Jewish perspective on this? So I was interested in what you said about the Talmud, that there are some writings in the Talmud about Jesus. Do you know, can you tell us anything about that?
I'll just say briefly that there are stories that we think are about Jesus. One of them, one famous one is that it depicts Jesus as some kind of a wise, learned student that went astray. And the Talmud discusses what do you do with someone that goes astray. Probably what he did that is wrong is that he did magic, which is forbidden in Judaism. And the Gemara thinks, what is the best way to react? Do you punish someone like that? Because then he might kind of like run away, and you don't want it, which is probably an allusion to, if we will be too harsh, if we will reject Jesus too much, then Christianity will come. And what is interesting is that really the Talmud it's clearly the rabbis are basically worried because they see Christianity becoming more and more kind of attractive, or kind of like gets more and more attention, and they try to kind of like stand the ground and like shape the kind of boundaries of where we as Jews stand vis-a-vis Christianity. So Jesus, in that way, kind of is part of it, and this is also where Toldot Yeshu is it's a later text, a medieval text that makes fun of Jesus, that really tells Jesus as a parody or a satire, in order to again kind of like think of Christianity and of what has become really a rival religion that actually now is our prosecutors. We need to kind of like be worried about our, and they blame us for the crucifixion of Jesus, right? So these are all very kind of apologetic texts that you could see how the Jewish rabbis think what would be the way to actually think of Jesus, what we want to educate our students to think Jesus is. And so, and that mentioning of my, like I said, like at the beginning I mentioned, like there is this quote of like one hand you dismiss or reject, and in one hand you kind of like welcome. And this is from that story that I've mentioned from the Talmud, where, okay, we need to find that balance between not to make Jesus and all his followers, of course, Jews, kind of go with him, but on the other hand, we don't want them to sin. We don't want Judaism to become Christianity. So the kind of like balance is there, like it bothers them. So,
thank you so much, Professor Neta Stahl.
Thank you.